The year was 1831, and the Carolina low country lay heavy with summer heat. Spanish moss draped from the oaks, fields of cotton stretched in every direction, and the air carried the mingled scents of earth, sweat, and sorrow. Beneath the outward beauty of the land, however, lived a darkness too deep to ignore. The land was not worked by free hands, nor were its profits built on fair labor. Instead, it was driven by the backs of the enslaved, men, women, and children born into a system that stripped them of their humanity before they could even take their first breath. It was in this place, on a sprawling rice and cotton plantation near the Edisto River, that Sarah entered the world. She did not enter into the arms of freedom, nor into the promise of her own future, but into bondage. She was born into chains, not chains of iron that clattered at her ankles that day, but chains of law, ownership, and inheritance. For in the Carolinas, a child born to an enslaved mother was enslaved too, no matter who the father might be. Sarah's mother, Dina, had been enslaved all her life. Her body bore the marks of lashes, her hands thickened by years of toil. Yet when she held her newborn daughter, she did not see chains, she saw life. She sang softly an old African lullaby passed down through generations, the words blurred by time, but still carrying their ancestral strength. Dinah knew the world would not treat her daughter kindly, but she also knew she must pour into Sarah every ounce of hope, resilience, and dignity she could. Sarah's earliest memories were of the quarters, a row of small, rough cabins made of wood and mud with dirt floors and little more than straw pallets for beds. Smoke from cooking fires filled the air, mingling with the cries of children and the weary sighs of women returning from the fields. Life here was not gentle, but it was the only home she knew. The enslaved carved out moments of humanity where they could, singing in the evenings, telling stories by the fire, braiding each other's hair, and whispering prayers that someday God would send deliverance. But Sarah's childhood, if it could be called that, was short-lived. By the time she could walk, she was put to work carrying water, gathering kindling, and watching younger children so their mothers could labor in the fields. She learned early that her life was not her own, that every hour belonged to the master, every task commanded by the overseer. She saw men beaten for working too slowly, women whipped for defiance, and children no older than herself, dragged into the fields to pick cotton until their small fingers bled. It was in these years that Sarah first came to understand the meaning of her inheritance. She was property, not a daughter, not a child, but an asset, catalogued in the master's ledger alongside plows, cattle, and wagons. Her name appeared not in baptism records or family trees, but in lists of inventory. Still, even under the crushing weight of slavery, life stirred with resistance. The enslaved found ways to claim their humanity in the smallest acts. They sang spirituals while they worked, the rhythm of their voices carrying hope over the endless rows of cotton. They gathered at night in secret prayer meetings, calling on the God of Israel, who had once freed his people from Egypt. And they taught their children, through stories, through whispered lessons, that they were more than what the master claimed them to be. Dinah, Sarah's mother, was especially determined to instill this in her daughter. She told her, "You are not just theirs. You belong to the Lord above. They may own your body, but they cannot own your soul." These words, repeated like a mantra, sank deep into Sarah's heart. She clung to them in the years to come, when the weight of chains threatened to crush her spirit. As Sarah grew, she began to notice the cruel patterns of life on the plantation. She saw how women were not only worked in the fields, but also treated as breeders. Their value to the master lay not only in their labor, but in their ability to produce more enslaved children, future laborers, future profit. Sarah overheard the older women whispering about it at night, their voices hushed but heavy with fear. She saw how young girls, scarcely older than herself, were eyed not as children but as future mothers of more property. At first, Sarah did not fully understand. She clung to the innocence of childhood as long as she could, listening to the stories of Africa, of ancestors who had been free, of dreams that someday freedom might return. But by the time she was 9, she could feel the weight of watchful eyes upon her. She was growing, changing, becoming something more than a child in the eyes of those who owned her. The reality terrified her. Her first taste of this dark truth came when she overheard the master speaking to the overseer. "She'll be ready soon enough," he said coldly, gesturing toward Sarah as though she were livestock. "Strong stock, her mother. She'll bring us plenty of new hands in time." Sarah ran back to the quarters that day, trembling though she did not yet understand every word. She clung to her mother, who held her tight but said nothing. The silence told Sarah everything. Her future was not her own, and yet, even in this reality, Sarah's spirit did not break. She was born into chains, but chains cannot crush what is carried in the soul. She began to observe the older women, learning from their resilience. She saw how they comforted one another, how they carved out spaces of joy even in the face of despair. She listened to the secret songs of freedom, memorizing every word, every rhythm. She learned how to weave baskets, how to braid hair in patterns that carried hidden meanings, how to whisper lessons to younger children without the overseer noticing. By the time she was 10, Sarah was no longer just a child of bondage. She was a student of survival, and though her body belonged to the plantation, her heart carried the seeds of resistance. Her birth had been in chains, her childhood stolen before it began. But within her burned something stronger than the master's whip, stronger than the overseer's cruelty. It was the knowledge, planted by her mother, that she was not just property. She was a person. She was a soul. She was more than the ledger could ever record. And though she could not yet see it, Sarah's resilience would become her greatest weapon in the years to come. When the plantation's darkest secret unfolded, and she was thrust into motherhood before she had even left childhood behind. Sarah's birth into chains reminds us that the greatest strength is often forged in the harshest fires. Though she was denied the freedoms most take for granted, her spirit carried resilience that no master could own. Her story teaches us that even when life begins in bondage, whether physical, emotional, or social, hope can still rise, dignity can still endure, and the human soul can never truly be chained. Childhood is meant to be a season of laughter, play, and innocence. It is the time when a child explores the world with wonder, shielded by the protective arms of family. But for Sarah, born into the iron grip of slavery on a Carolina plantation, childhood was not a gift she was allowed to keep. It was stolen from her, piece by piece, until what remained was not a girl discovering life but a young soul being forced into adulthood long before its time. By the time Sarah was 6 years old, she was already working, while free children in Charleston might have been learning letters or chasing one another in dusty schoolyards. Sarah carried water jugs to the fields and gathered scraps of wood for the cooking fires. She rose before the sun, the morning air still cool and damp, and ran barefoot across the dirt paths of the quarters, her small frame balancing pails almost as large as herself. Work was constant. Work was endless. Work was survival. Childhood games and dreams were luxuries Sarah never knew. She did not own a doll, a book, or even a bed of her own. At night, she collapsed onto a straw pallet beside her mother, her body aching from chores meant for someone twice her size. Still, in those early years, Sarah's mother tried to protect a shred of her daughter's innocence. Dinah would tell her stories by the fire, tales of ancestors who had once walked free in Africa, tales of clever animals who outwitted stronger foes. They were more than just stories. They were lessons. "Remember, Sarah," her mother would whisper, "the fox survives not because he is big, but because he is wise." But even as her mother wove tales of hope, reality pressed in. The plantation was no place for innocence. Overseers barked orders. Whips cracked in the distance. Sarah saw men tied to posts and beaten until their backs split open. She saw women dragged away to the big house at night, returning with tears in their eyes and bruises on their arms. She was too young to fully understand what was happening, but she knew enough life here was cruel and no one was safe from its reach. When Sarah was 7, she lost her first friend. Leela, a girl just a year older, was sold away with her mother to a plantation further inland. One morning, Sarah woke to find Leela's cabin empty, her bed stripped bare. She ran to her mother in tears, asking where her friend had gone. Dina held her close and said, "She's been taken, child, sold." "But why?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Because to them, Her mother replied, bitterness laced in her words, "We are not people. We are things. And things can be bought and sold." The truth seared Sarah's heart. She had already known the plantation was cruel, but now she understood something deeper. Love and friendship, the very things that made her feel human, could be ripped away at any moment. Nothing belonged to her, not even the people she loved. From that day forward, Sarah carried a quiet fear inside her. Every time she hugged her mother, she wondered if it would be the last. Every time she spoke to a friend, she wondered if they too would vanish. Childhood should have been a time of security, but for Sarah it was a lesson in loss. By 9, Sarah's body began to change. She was still just a child, but she noticed the way the overseer's gaze lingered too long when she passed. The older women whispered about it, their eyes filled with sorrow and dread. They had seen it happen before. Girls barely in their teens were forced into the cruel role of breeders, pushed into motherhood before they were ready, their children taken and sold for profit. Sarah did not fully grasp what the whispers meant, but she felt the fear. She clung tighter to her mother, staying close whenever possible. Dinah tried to shield her, keeping her near the cabin and away from the overseer's notice, but she knew she could only protect her daughter for so long. On the plantation, a girl's childhood ended the moment the master or overseer decided it did. When Sarah was 10, she tasted the whip for the first time. The memory never left her. She had been slow to bring water to the field, her small arms trembling under the weight of the heavy pails. The overseer, impatient and cruel, lashed her across the back. The pain was searing, a fire that cut through her skin and straight into her soul. She stumbled, fell, and cried out, but no one could help her. The older slaves watched with tears in their eyes but said nothing. To protest was to invite the lash themselves. Dinah rushed to her daughter that night, washing her wounds with cloths soaked in river water, whispering prayers over her child. "I told you, Sarah," she said through tears. "They will not even spare the children." It was then that Sarah truly understood her childhood was over. There would be no time for play, no shield of innocence. She was already being forced into the harsh reality of adulthood. At 12, Sarah's stolen childhood was sealed in the cruelest way. She was chosen, forced to begin bearing children for the plantation. She was not ready. She was not a woman. She was still a child who had barely learned what it meant to live, yet her body was taken and treated as nothing more than a tool for profit. Her mother wept when she heard the news. "They will use you now," Dinah whispered, holding her tightly. "But don't let them take your soul. Your body is theirs, but your spirit is still yours." The first pregnancy broke Sarah's heart. She was confused, frightened, and in pain. When the child was born, she felt an instant surge of love, but it was ripped from her arms within days. The baby was sold, carried away before Sarah even knew if it was a boy or girl. She cried for weeks, her body aching with loss, her arms empty. She was still just a girl herself, and yet she was expected to endure the pain of a mother losing her child. It was then she realized the full truth. Her childhood was not just stolen. It had been erased, replaced with the crushing weight of a role she had never chosen. Yet even in her suffering, Sarah found strength. She whispered blessings over every child she bore, even when they were taken from her. She became a quiet mentor to the younger girls, warning them of what awaited, but urging them to hold on to hope. "They can take your childhood," she told them softly, "but they cannot take your spirit unless you let them." She carved out small acts of defiance. She sang lullabies from her mother's stories, planting seeds of courage in other children. She stole moments of joy in the quarters, dancing, laughing, and pretending, if only for a breath, that they were free. These moments, fragile as they were, kept her humanity alive. What made Sarah's stolen childhood so tragic was not just the work, the beatings, or the forced motherhood. It was the theft of possibility. Childhood is supposed to be the soil in which dreams grow, but Sarah was never allowed to dream. Her future was decided before she could even speak her name. And yet, out of that theft, something remarkable grew. Her stolen childhood gave her resilience. It forged in her a strength beyond her years. It gave her the ability to endure suffering and still cling to hope. She became a living testimony to the human spirit's refusal to be completely broken, no matter how cruel the chains. Sarah's childhood was stolen long before she could understand what it meant. She was denied play, denied safety, denied the innocence every child deserves. She was thrust into pain, into labor, into motherhood before her time. And yet, even in her suffering, she carried within her a spark of resistance that no master could extinguish. Her story reminds us that injustice may steal years, opportunities, and freedoms, but it cannot erase the human spirit's ability to endure. Childhood was stolen from Sarah, but strength was given in its place, a strength that inspired those around her and echoes across generations. Motherhood is meant to be a gift. It is meant to come with joy, anticipation, and the warm embrace of family. But for Sarah, an enslaved girl on a Carolina plantation, it was something altogether different. For her, motherhood was not a choice, not a season of love, but a burden forced upon her before she had even left childhood behind. It was a cruel fate, one that weighed heavily on her body and her soul. By the age of 12, Sarah's body was still that of a girl. Her arms were thin, her shoulders narrow, and her face still carried the softness of childhood. But to the plantation's master and overseer, none of that mattered. To them, she was not a child, she was a womb, a source of future profit. The system of slavery in the Carolinas was built not only on labor but also on breeding. The law declared that the child of an enslaved woman would also be enslaved, no matter who the father was. For masters, this meant wealth could multiply without cost. Every child born on the plantation was another hand in the field, another line of profit in the ledger. And so young girls, scarcely into womanhood, were forced into motherhood long before their time. Sarah was chosen. She was told, not asked, that she would now bear children. She did not understand everything at first, only that her body would no longer be her own, and her childhood was now gone forever. Her mother, Dinah, wept when she learned what was coming. She pulled Sarah into her arms and whispered through tears, "They take everything from us, child. Our work, our love, even our babies. But promise me this, you will not let them take your spirit. You will carry that for yourself, and for every child you bring into this world." Sarah nodded, though fear gripped her heart. She was still a child herself. How could she be a mother? The months of her first pregnancy were filled with fear and confusion. Her body changed in ways she did not understand. She ached with pains too heavy for her young frame. She grew weary in the fields, her swollen belly slowing her movements, earning her harsh words from the overseer. No sympathy was given. To him she was just another body that must continue to produce, no matter the cost. When the time came to give birth, Sarah was attended by older women in the quarters. They gathered around her, whispering prayers, holding her hands, and guiding her through the pain. The master had no interest in her suffering, only in the result. The baby was born in the dead of night, in the dim light of a single lantern, with Sarah's cries muffled by her mother's arms. The child, a girl, was placed in Sarah's trembling hands. For the first time, despite her exhaustion and fear, Sarah felt something new: love. She looked down at the tiny face, the small fists curling, and she felt her heart ache with a fierce tenderness. But the moment was fleeting. Within days, the baby was taken from her arms. She was carried to the master's house, and soon after sold to another plantation. Sarah never even learned the name that was given to her daughter. She was left with empty arms, a hollow ache, and a grief too deep for words. That was the true weight of motherhood for Sarah's, to give life, only to have it stolen. Over the years, the pattern repeated. Sarah bore child after child, each one taken from her before she could watch them grow. Sometimes they were sold within weeks, sometimes within months. On rare occasions, a child might remain on the plantation, but even then, Sarah was not allowed to raise them freely. Children were often separated from their mothers, placed in groups to be raised for labor. Each loss carved another wound into Sarah's heart. She carried the memories like ghosts, faces she could never forget, cries she could never silence. Her arms longed to hold them, her lips longed to sing them to sleep, but slavery denied her even that. And yet, with each child, Sarah found strength too. She whispered blessings over them before they were taken, words of hope and courage. "May you know freedom, my child," she would murmur, tears streaming down her face. "May you live to see the day these chains are broken." Her whispered prayers became her rebellion. She could not stop the system, but she could plant seeds of hope into every soul she brought into the world. The weight of motherhood was not only emotional, it was physical. Sarah's young body was worn by repeated pregnancies, often with little time to recover between them. Her bones ached, her strength drained, and yet she was still forced to work in the fields. The overseer gave no allowances. Pregnant or not, mother or not, she was expected to pick cotton, haul loads, and endure. Illness often followed childbirth, but care was scarce. Some women died from exhaustion or infection, leaving their newborns behind. Sarah knew she might one day share that fate. But each time she willed herself to survive, not for herself, but for the children she had already lost. She told herself that as long as she lived, their memory lived too. The heaviest part of motherhood for Sarah was not the work, not even the pain of childbirth. It was the grief of loss repeated over and over. No mother should bury her child, and no mother should be forced to watch her children sold away. But Sarah endured both, many times. The grief was a constant shadow. She would wake in the night to phantom cries, her body aching for babies who were no longer there. She would dream of holding them, only to wake with empty arms. Every time she saw another woman's child, she thought of her own. Scattered across the South, their faces unknown, their futures uncertain. The cruelty of the system was not only in the separation but in the erasure. Enslaved women like Sarah were denied even the dignity of motherhood. Their children were not theirs, they belonged to the master. The very word, mother, was stripped of meaning, turned into another cog in the machine of slavery. Yet Sarah refused to let the weight crush her. She carried her grief as a burden, yes, but also as a banner. She turned her pain into strength. Other young women on the plantation looked to her for guidance, and she told them, "We cannot stop what they do to us, but we can still love our children, even if they are taken. We can still pray for them. We can still hope." Her resilience inspired others. She became known in the quarters as a source of comfort, a woman who wept with those who had lost their children, who sang lullabies to orphaned babies, who whispered encouragement to girls trembling at the thought of their first pregnancy. The weight of motherhood had been forced upon her, but she turned it into a source of resistance. She would not let slavery silence her love. She would not let cruelty erase her dignity. As Sarah grew older, her body bore the scars of her burdens. Her back was bent, her hands gnarled, her face lined with sorrow, but her eyes still carried fire. She never gave up on the belief that her children, wherever they were, carried a piece of her strength within them. She did not live to see emancipation. She did not live to see her children return. But her story lived on through whispers in the quarters, through the women who remembered her words, through the descendants who one day discovered that their ancestor had endured the impossible and still held her head high. Sarah's motherhood had been weighted with grief, but it had also been marked by resilience. She had borne children not in freedom, but in bondage, not in joy, but in sorrow. Yet she had given them something slavery could not take: the inheritance of her strength, her love, and her unbroken spirit. The weight of motherhood for Sarah was a crushing burden, forced upon her before she was even a woman. She carried pregnancies she did not choose, endured losses she could not stop, and suffered grief no heart should bear. And yet, she turned that weight into strength. She transformed forced motherhood into a form of quiet resistance, whispering hope into the lives of children who might one day know freedom. Her story reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit. Even when motherhood is stolen, twisted, and burdened by injustice, love endures. Strength endures. And through that endurance, even the heaviest chains can one day be broken. Resistance does not always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers in the dark. Sometimes it hides in a song, in a prayer, or in a look exchanged between two weary souls. For Sarah, an enslaved girl forced into motherhood before her time, resistance could not be open. Whips and chains were waiting for any who defied the system outright, but that did not mean she was powerless. Though her body was owned, her spirit still belonged to her, and in that spirit she waged her own war. a war of quiet, unshakable resistance. The Carolina plantation where Sarah lived was a place of constant surveillance. Overseers rode on horseback between the fields, whips coiled at their sides. The master's eyes missed nothing when he prowled the grounds. Every word, every gesture, every glance could be reported, punished, or twisted into evidence of rebellion. Sarah learned quickly that to survive, she had to hide her thoughts. She wore a mask of obedience in the fields, her head bowed, her hands busy. But inside, her mind was alive. She studied the rhythms of life around her, the way elders passed down stories, the way women sang while working, the way men shared knowledge about the stars and the woods. Beneath the surface of labor, there pulsed a current of resistance. The master saw bodies bent over cotton. What he did not see was the spirit of a people refusing to let go of their humanity. One of Sarah's first acts of resistance was in song. Music filled the quarters at night. When the day's work was done, spirituals rose from weary throats, blending grief and hope into melodies that carried across the fields. Some songs were prayers, pleas for deliverance. Others were coded messages hiding instructions for escape. Sarah sang too. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying tunes she had learned from her mother. She sang while she rocked the babies in the quarters, while she braided hair, while she cooked cornmeal over the fire. Her favorite was a song about crossing rivers, a metaphor for freedom. She sang it to children, teaching them the rhythm so it would live in their memories. Every note was an act of defiance. Slavery wanted silence, despair, brokenness. But Sarah sang, and in singing she declared, "You have not destroyed me." Though Sarah had never been allowed to go to school, she had a quick mind. She listened carefully whenever the master's children recited lessons. Letters fascinated her, the strange shapes that carried meaning. She began to recognize some words by ear and eye. When she was older, she whispered what she had learned to other children in the quarters. With sticks in the dirt, she traced letters. With ashes on wood, she taught them to spell their own names. To teach literacy was dangerous. If the overseer discovered it, punishments would be severe. But Sarah believed knowledge was power. "Learn this," she whispered to the children. "One day you'll need it. Letters are keys. They open doors they don't want us to walk through." In secret, by firelight, Sarah passed on fragments of knowledge. It was not much, but it was enough to spark hope in young minds. Sarah also resisted by protecting others. When she saw the overseer's eyes lingering on young girls, she warned them. She told them to stay close to the women, to avoid being alone near the big house. She could not shield them entirely. Too often force was unavoidable, but she tried to prepare them for what she had endured. "You are more than what they do to you," she told them. "They may touch your body, but they cannot touch who you are inside. Remember that." Her words became a lifeline for younger girls. They looked to Sarah as both sister and mother, finding strength in her quiet guidance. Resistance was not only about survival. It was about keeping alive the culture slavery tried to erase. Sarah learned old African songs and braided hair in intricate patterns that carried meaning. Some designs mirrored river paths and roads, symbols of survival and memory. At night she told folktales of Anansi the spider, stories that taught wisdom and cunning. Children gathered around wide-eyed, listening to the trickster who outwitted stronger foes. They laughed, clapped, and carried the lessons in their hearts. By telling stories, Sarah reminded them that they were part of something bigger than slavery. They had roots, traditions, and ancestors who had once walked free. She was telling them, "You are not just property. You are people with history and dignity." The enslaved were often forbidden from gathering for worship without supervision. Masters feared that prayer meetings might spark rebellion. Still, in the woods at night, people slipped away to hold hush harbors. Secret services whispered beneath trees, far from watchful eyes. Sarah joined them, kneeling in the dark, her hands clasped tight. The prayers were quiet but fervent. The songs were soft but full of fire. They called on the God of Exodus, the deliverer who had freed his people from bondage. For Sarah, these gatherings were more than worship. They were resistance. To pray for freedom was to defy the system that claimed her as property. To believe she was a child of God was to reject the lie that she was nothing more than a tool for labor and breeding. Each prayer strengthened her. Each song renewed her hope. Sarah learned to live with two faces. By day she appeared submissive. She bowed her head, answered quickly, moved without hesitation. To the overseer she was compliant, but behind the mask, she was calculating, watching, storing knowledge. She knew how to appear broken while keeping her spirit intact. It was a dangerous balance. One mistake could mean the lash. But Sarah became skilled at walking the line, playing the role expected of her while secretly sowing seeds of resistance. Her silence was not surrender, it was strategy. The heaviest weight Sarah carried was her children, those she had birthed and lost, and those yet unborn. Each time she was forced into motherhood, she knew the child would likely be taken. Yet she resisted by giving them everything she could in the short time they were hers. She whispered love into their ears. She sang lullabies of freedom. She prayed over them, blessing them with strength and courage. She believed her spirit would live on in them, even if they never knew her name. Her motherhood became her rebellion. She could not stop the master from selling her children, but she could give them an inheritance of resilience. That, she decided, was something slavery could never erase. Silent resistance took many forms. Sometimes it was as small as slowing her work for just a moment, forcing the overseer to shout. Sometimes it was slipping extra food to a starving child. Sometimes it was hiding a runaway for a night, giving them bread and water before they fled north. Each act was a risk. Each act was a statement. To live under slavery was to live under constant command. But in every small defiance, Sarah whispered to herself, "I am still mine." Years passed, and Sarah's reputation grew in the quarters. She was not loud, not fairy, but steady. Her silence was her strength. Others came to her for comfort, for guidance, for hope. She had become a pillar, not because she fought with fists, but because she endured with dignity. The master never suspected the depth of her resistance. To him, she was simply another enslaved woman, a womb producing children, a back bent over cotton. He never saw that beneath the surface, she was a warrior, fighting not with weapons but with spirit. Silent resistance was Sarah's survival. She could not storm the plantation gates. She could not fight the overseer with fists or weapons. But she could sing, she could teach, she could love, she could whisper courage to children and strength to women. She could preserve her dignity when everything around her sought to strip it away. And in doing so, she proved a powerful truth: resistance does not always need to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the quietest acts are the bravest of all. Her story teaches us that even when the world tries to silence us, we can still resist. Through the way we love, the way we endure, and the way we refuse to let cruelty define us. Sarah's silence was not weakness, it was her greatest strength. Voices are powerful things. They can wound, they can heal, they can carry stories across generations. For Sarah, the enslaved girl who had been forced into motherhood as a child, her voice became the one thing she owned entirely. Her body could be controlled, her children taken, her labor consumed, but her voice remained hers. And as the years passed, she learned to wield it with quiet strength, shaping not only her own survival but the future of those who came after her. When Sarah was young, her voice had been small. She spoke little, afraid of the overseer's wrath, afraid of the punishments that came when enslaved people were caught speaking freely. Words were dangerous. A misplaced sentence could be reported, twisted into insolence, punished with the lash. In those days, she held her voice inside her. She sang softly in the quarters, whispered prayers to her children before they were taken, shared secrets with her mother in the dark. Her silence was a shield. But silence is not the same as absence. Even in her youth, Sarah was learning the power of words. She listened carefully, storing away phrases, songs, and stories. She learned that speech could carry resistance, even if it was spoken only in whispers. Time passed. Sarah grew into womanhood, then into the weary strength of middle age. Her body bore the marks of hard labor, scars on her back from the whip, calluses on her hands from cotton, the sag of her shoulders from years of carrying loads too heavy. Yet her spirit had not broken. By the time she was in her 30s, Sarah had lived through what many on the plantation recognized as extraordinary trials. She had borne children who were stolen from her. She had endured the overseer's cruelty and the master's control. Yet she remained a figure of endurance. Others began to look to her, not just the young girls who feared what was coming, but grown men and women who needed guidance. Her quiet strength became its own authority. She did not demand respect, but it was given. She had earned it through survival, through resilience, through the way she carried herself with dignity despite all that had been done to her. And with that authority came the freedom to speak more boldly. In the evenings, after the fields had emptied and the overseer's watchful eye had retreated to the big house, the quarters would come alive. Fires were lit, food was cooked, stories and songs filled the air. In those moments, Sarah's voice grew stronger. She told stories to the children, folk tales of trickster animals who outwitted stronger enemies, tales of ancestors who had once been kings and queens in lands across the sea. She spoke of bravery, of cleverness, of hope. The children hung on her every word, their imaginations carrying them far beyond the boundaries of the plantation. To the women, she spoke words of comfort. "You are not what they call you," she told them. "You are not just their property. You are mothers, sisters, daughters. You are more than what they do to you." To the men, she spoke words of courage. "Keep your strength. Do not let them take your will. One day freedom will come, and we must be ready to stand." Her voice became a balm, a teacher, and a weapon all at once. Sarah's voice also found power in song. Over the years, she became known for leading spirituals in the quarters and in the secret hush harbors, where enslaved people gathered to worship in the woods. Her voice was not the loudest, but it was steady, filled with conviction. When she sang of crossing Jordan or walking to freedom's land, others felt their burdens lift. Her songs carried sorrow but also promise. They reminded the people that they were more than slaves, that their souls belonged to God, not to the master. Sometimes, when a child was born, Sarah would sing blessings over them. When someone died, she would sing them home. Her songs became the thread that bound the community, weaving together grief and hope. Through music, Sarah's voice carried far beyond herself. It echoed in the hearts of others, shaping the way they endured. One of Sarah's greatest acts of resistance was the way she used her voice to teach. She could not write, but she taught children their names, their stories, their worth. She whispered lessons about herbs that could heal, about stars that guided runaways north, about prayers that could soothe fear. She told them, "You must carry what I give you, because one day I will not be here, but you will, and you must pass it on." Her words became seeds planted in young hearts. Some children would grow to escape slavery, carrying Sarah's voice with them into freedom. Others would remain, but with her lessons in their minds, they too would pass her wisdom forward. Through teaching, Sarah ensured that even if she never saw freedom herself, her voice would live on in the next generation. By the 1850s, whispers of rebellion and escape were spreading across plantations. Stories of the Underground Railroad, of Harriet Tubman, of uprisings in other states reached even the Carolina fields. The enslaved spoke cautiously, careful not to be overheard, but the hope of liberation flickered like fire in the dark. Sarah added her voice to these whispers. She could not run herself. Too many years of labor had left her body weary, too scared to make the journey. But she encouraged the young and strong. She told them to listen to the stars, to trust the North Star. She taught them which plants in the woods could be eaten for food, which rivers might lead them northward. She never openly declared rebellion, but her words prepared others for it. She gave them courage, she gave them knowledge, she gave them hope. And in doing so, Sarah's voice became part of the quiet movement that chipped away at slavery's hold. Every word Sarah spoke carried risk. Overseers were quick to punish. Insolence, and even a hint of defiance could lead to the whip. But by then, Sarah no longer feared punishment as she once had. She had endured so much already that pain had lost its power to silence her. She learned to speak carefully, choosing her words with wisdom. She cloaked resistance in parables, in songs, in prayers. To the master, her words seemed harmless. To the enslaved, they were fire. Her voice was her weapon, sharpened by years of silence, wielded with care. As Sarah entered old age, change began to stir in the land. The Civil War broke out. The sound of cannons rumbled in distant states. Rumors spread that the North fought to end slavery. The enslaved on the plantation waited anxiously, listening to scraps of news passed from traveler to traveler. Some dared to hope that freedom was near. Others feared it was only another cruel rumor. Sarah's voice rose in that time of uncertainty. She told the people, "We must be ready. Freedom may not come tomorrow, but it will come. Do not give up. Do not lose your spirit now." When the day is drawing near, her words carried them through those dark years of war. When supplies ran low, punishments grew harsher, and fear was heavy in the air. Her voice reminded them that they were close to the dawn. When emancipation finally came, Sarah was old, her body bent, her hair gray, her hands trembling. She did not run shouting through the fields as some did. Instead, she wept quietly, her tears falling into the earth she had worked her whole life. She had lived to see the day. She had outlasted the system that sought to break her. And though she did not know where her children were, she believed in her heart that her voice had reached them, somehow, somewhere. In the years after emancipation, Sarah continued to speak. She told her story to younger generations, making sure they understood the cost of their freedom. She warned them never to forget, never to allow chains to be placed upon their children again. Her voice became a bridge between the past and the future. Sarah eventually passed, her body laid to rest beneath a simple wooden marker. But her voice did not die with her. It lived in the songs she had taught, in the stories she had told, in the lessons whispered to children. Her descendants, though scattered, carried her resilience in their blood. They carried her wisdom in their hearts. Her voice became part of a larger chorus of enslaved people whose endurance shaped the generations that followed. And so, though she was born in chains and forced into motherhood before her time, Sarah left behind something far greater than sorrow. She left a voice for the future, a voice that still echoes whenever stories of survival, dignity, and strength are told. Sarah's life teaches us that even in the darkest of times, a voice can change everything. It may not topple empires overnight, but it can plant seeds that grow for generations. Her voice, soft but unyielding, was a weapon, a comfort, a guide, and a legacy. She was never given a platform, never allowed to speak freely. Yet she used her words in whispers, songs, and stories to nurture hope in others. She proved that resistance does not always roar. Sometimes it is carried on the breath of a woman who refuses to let silence have the last word. And that is Sarah's true legacy, not just survival, but the gift of her voice. A voice that carried the future within it. History is not only a record of events, it is a teacher. Within every story of pain lies a message, a truth that reaches across time to shape the lives of those who listen. Sarah's life, marked by chains, stolen childhood, forced motherhood, and silent resistance, was one such story. Though she never lived to see the full fruit of her endurance, her legacy offers a lasting lesson for all who come after her. It is a lesson of dignity, strength, and the unbreakable power of the human spirit. The first lesson we learn from Sarah's story comes from the chains themselves. Slavery tried to define her life entirely. To the master, she was nothing but property. To the overseer, she was just another laborer in the fields. To the law, she was not a person but an asset, her worth measured in cotton and coin. Everything about the system sought to strip Sarah of identity. She was denied her childhood. She was denied the right to choose motherhood. She was denied the right to raise her own children. She was denied even the basic recognition of her humanity. And yet, Sarah never accepted those chains as the truth of who she was. She endured them, yes, but she refused to let them define her. She knew, deep within, that she was more than property. She was a daughter, a mother, a teacher, a singer, a believer, a human being with dignity that no law could erase. That is the first lasting lesson. No matter what the world tries to label us, we are always more. Our worth does not depend on the titles, chains, or judgments others place upon us. It depends on the unshakable truth of our humanity. Another lesson lies in Sarah's ability to endure. To live in slavery was to live under constant pain, physical, emotional, and spiritual. For many, despair was overwhelming. And yet Sarah carried on. She bore the burden of forced motherhood, the grief of separation, the cruelty of overseers, and the endless labor of the fields. She carried these wounds but never let them silence her spirit. Her endurance was not passive. It was active, fierce, and determined. She endured so that she could comfort others. She endured so that she could plant hope in children. She endured so that her voice would live to tell the story. In a world that constantly sought to erase her, endurance itself was resistance. The second lasting lesson is this: endurance is not weakness. It is strength. It is choosing to stand, even when the ground shakes beneath you. It is choosing to keep going, even when the world tries to break you. In endurance, we find courage. Sarah never led an armed rebellion. She never stormed the master's house or struck down the overseer with her fists. Yet her life was one long act of resistance. She resisted by singing songs of hope when the system wanted silence. She resisted by teaching children their names, their history, their worth. She resisted by whispering courage to women and knowledge to men. She resisted by protecting the young from cruelty where she could, and by reminding them that they were more than what slavery tried to make them. Her resistance was quiet, but it was powerful. It kept the flame of humanity alive in a place designed to extinguish it. This is the third lasting lesson: resistance takes many forms. It does not always come in battles or revolutions. Sometimes it comes in whispers, in lullabies, in acts of love that defy hate. Resistance is anything that says, "I am still here, I am still human. You will not take that from me." Though Sarah's children were stolen from her, she gave them something no master could ever take: the inheritance of her spirit. Every lullaby she sang, every blessing she whispered, every prayer she offered became a seed planted in the future. She may not have known where her children went, but her love followed them. Her voice was her legacy. It lived in songs, in stories, in the hearts of those who remembered her. Long after her body was gone, her voice echoed in generations that rose from bondage into freedom. The fourth lasting lesson is this: the truest legacy we leave is not what we own, but what we give. We may not control the future, but the seeds we plant, through love, through wisdom, through courage, will grow long after we are gone. Sarah did not live in vain. Her story, and the stories of countless others like her, became the soil from which freedom grew. The Civil War, emancipation, and the slow march toward justice were built on the endurance of enslaved people who carried hope through impossible suffering. But freedom was not free. It was bought with lives, with tears, with generations of pain. Sarah's story reminds us that liberty has a cost, and it must be honored. To forget that cost would be to betray the sacrifice of those who endured it. The fifth lasting lesson is this: freedom is precious. It must never be taken for granted, and it must always be protected. For if history teaches us anything, it is that chains can return if we do not guard against them. Sarah's story is not locked in the past. It echoes into the present, challenging us to see the struggles around us today. Her endurance teaches us to look at the marginalized, the oppressed, the silenced, and to ask ourselves, how do we respond? Do we turn away, or do we raise our voices in their defense? Her silent resistance teaches us that even small acts matter. A kind word, a song, a prayer, a moment of courage. These can ripple through time in ways we cannot measure. Her legacy as a mother teaches us that we carry responsibility for future generations. The seeds we plant today will grow into the world our children inherit. The sixth lasting lesson is this: history is a mirror. When we look into Sarah's life, we are not only remembering her, we are seeing ourselves. We are being asked what kind of legacy we will leave. Sarah's life, above all, speaks to the weight carried by mothers. She bore children not in freedom, but in bondage. She raised them not with security, but with the constant fear of loss. She lived the pain of separation again and again, yet still loved fiercely. Still gave her children every ounce of hope she could. Her motherhood was weaponized against her by slavery, but she transformed it into an act of love that outlived the system itself. To the mothers of the world, Sarah's story is a reminder that motherhood is sacred. It is a source of strength, of sacrifice, of love so fierce it can defy even the cruelest of systems. The seventh lasting lesson is this: never underestimate the power of a mother's love. It can endure chains. It can outlive sorrow. It can carry entire generations forward. Sarah's life may have been shaped by suffering, but her legacy is shaped by strength. She teaches us that humanity cannot be erased, even in the darkest of times. She teaches us that resistance does not always need to be loud. It can be carried in silence, in song, in love. She teaches us that endurance itself is an act of defiance. She teaches us that our voices matter, even if we never see the full fruit of what we plant. Her lasting lesson is simple, but profound. You are more than what the world tries to make you. You are stronger than the chains placed upon you. And the seeds of hope you plant today may grow into freedom tomorrow. When we speak Sarah's story, we do more than honor one woman. We honor the countless voices of enslaved people who endured, resisted, and left legacies of strength. We honor the resilience that carried generations through bondage into freedom. We honor the lesson that even in the darkest chapters of history, the human spirit shines. And so Sarah's story lives on, not just as tragedy, but as truth, not just as sorrow, but as strength, not just as the past, but as a guide for the future. This is the lasting lesson that dignity, love, and courage will always outlive oppression. Chains may bind bodies, but they cannot bind the human spirit. And as long as we remember that, freedom will never be silenced.